All right, so let's start with an image. Picture this. A former president of the United States.
Just out of office.
Exactly. He's just handed the keys to the White House over to his successor, William Howard Taft. But he doesn't, head for a quiet library.
No, not at all.
He doesn't start some genteel speaking tour. Instead, Theodore Roosevelt immediately sets off for the African wilderness.
And his goal, his explicit goal, was to put himself in physical danger every single day, to test his strength, his endurance, everything.
Yeah. His retirement, starting in 1909, was, without question, anything but quiet.
And that's really the period, right? The decade from 1909 until his death in 1919. It arguably holds the most critical insight into his character, into his whole legacy.
Because he's unconstrained.
Totally unconstrained by the presidency. He becomes this, global adventurer, a radical political apostate, and then ultimately this fierce crusader for American preparedness before World War I.
So that's what we're diving into today, that intense final decade. Our mission is to really pull out the core insights from this life lived uncontained. We've got a stack of sources that detail 3 incredible phases.
What's first?
First, his shift from president to this global celebrity and adventurer across Africa, Europe, and then the Amazon, which was just perilous.
And then the politics.
The huge political war against Taft and the Republican establishment, the whole Bull Moose movement.
Which is seismic, yeah.
And third, his crusade against Woodrow Wilson's neutrality and his ferocious but ultimately tragic response to America's entry into World War I.
And the goal here isn't just to, list the events. It's to understand the velocity of this man. We need to see how the most strenuous of men, as he was called, defined his own relevance when the structure of the presidency was just gone.
He used that decade to push himself further, physically, politically, intellectually, than maybe any other former president in American history.
And what does that tell us? What does that continuous, almost superhuman intensity tell us about the price of action?
So you can't even begin to talk about the African trip without first understanding the deep philosophical engine that was driving Roosevelt.
Right. You have to go back to his childhood.
He was an incredibly frail, sickly kid. He almost died multiple times before he was 5 from, acute asthma and nervous diarrhea.
And that early physical weakness was really the genesis of his whole lifelong defiant worldview.
Exactly. When he left college, he basically declared war on his own body. He actually said, I'm going to do all the things you tell me not to do.
And this was more than just exercise for him. It was a doctrine, a kind of self-creation through just sheer force of will. He punished bone and muscle till both grew strong, and he often ignored his overstrained heart his entire life.
And the African safari, which was, officially an expedition for the Smithsonian Institution.
Right, there was a scientific pretext.
It was his ultimate expression of that philosophy. The sources say he saw the rule of tooth and claw in nature as supreme.
And he saw that as a mirror of his own success in joining the governing class. It wasn't just a trip for him. It was a validation of this ruthless, vigorous worldview where only the strong survive and, more importantly, act.
That worldview really comes through in the sheer scale of the operation.
Oh, absolutely. While he had this genuine scientific curiosity, he was a serious ornithologist, a natural historian, the hunt was also a very public display of conquering the wild.
The scenes of him arriving in East Africa sound spectacular, horizon-filling herds of wildebeest and impala.
His staff was almost overwhelmed by the sheer volume of game they encountered.
But I have to ask, the sheer volume of killing, that had to be controversial, right? Even back then.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge point of tension.
So how did he square that with the conservation movement he basically created?
That's a crucial point, and it reflects the tension of the era. He saw it as a scientific necessity. It was for preservation, but preservation in a museum. He and his son, Kermit, bagged multiple specimens of nearly every major African species.
The logistics behind that must have been staggering.
They were. His naturalists, a guy named Heller and another named Mearns, were engaged in what's described as Herculean skinning and salting.
Wow.
Just to make sure these specimens, and we're talking 5 or 6 examples of a single species sometimes for study, were properly preserved for the trip back to Washington.
And that work resulted in what was described as a collection of large animals such as has never been obtained for any other museum in the world on a single trip.
It was completely unprecedented, an almost industrial effort. We're talking about thousands of items. 5,000 mammals, 4,000 birds.
2,000 reptiles, countless plants. It's mind-boggling.
But even with all that intense focus on, ornithological details or the thrill of shooting lions, And there's this great story of him taking down a big maneless lion with one perfect shot. He could never truly escape his own persona.
Right. He was still TR.
Exactly. He remained, as one source puts it, quote, irredeemably a public figure, obsessed with his own image. The private philosopher couldn't be separated from the public icon.
And the media just ate it up.
Immediately. American editors knew no story could be more surefire than that of Colonel Roosevelt daily risking death in Africa. The narrative just wrote itself.
He might have said he wanted privacy, but you get the sense he kind of missed his worshipful cadre of young scribes back in Washington.
That whole pose of privacy was, at best, half-hearted. You see it perfectly when he comes out of the bush.
This is when he arrives in Khartoum, right? March 1910.
Yeah, he's moving up the Nile, back
Yeah.
to civilization. And these three reporters, from the Chicago Tribune, the New York World, they emerged from the Nile mist in this little steamboat they commandeered,
No way.
waving the stars and stripes to greet him. They were literally offering to be his traveling stenographer for the European leg of the trip.
Can you just imagine the sheer commitment of those reporters paddling up the Nile, just hoping to ambush a former president? And it just shows his incredible celebrity status. He was a story magnet.
And Roosevelt was already thinking ahead. He was so aware of the history of the place. He imagined the haze over Khartoum was red with the blood of General Gordon.
Who was murdered in that very palace by modest dervishes.
Right. He understood that even as a private citizen, his words carried this immense geopolitical weight. This trip wasn't just about trophies for a museum. It was about reestablishing his relevance on the world stage.
And he immediately got a publishing deal with The Outlook.
For income, yes, but also, and this is key, to promulgate his political views. He was already preparing to get back in the game even before he set foot in Europe.
The moment he crosses from Africa to Europe, that political currency just explodes into pure global celebrity.
Oh, absolutely. By the time Roosevelt reaches Paris in the spring of 1910, the analysis is pretty clear. He was arguably the most famous man in the world.
More than any king or emperor.
Yeah, think about the power structure then. No monarch, not the Kaiser, not King Edward VII, had his specific kind of appeal. He had democratic appeal, he had press appeal across 3 continents. He was a known quantity with a genius of being sensational.
He was basically modern power incarnate.
Right. He joked about it, saying he was like a Thanksgiving turkey tough, but temporary.
But the reaction he got was historic. In Budapest, he received a popular demonstration that was bigger than anything seen since Franz Liszt's return in 1846.
And the sound of it cheers rolled over the Berg across the river and came back in a thundering echo. That's a kind of star power that goes way beyond politics.
And this fame gave him this incredible access, almost like a visiting head of state, to the crumbling European old order.
It did. When he met Emperor Franz Joseph at the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, the old monarch confessed something really profound.
What was that?
He said he was the last representative of the old system and hailed Roosevelt as the embodiment of the present and future.
Wow. The old system literally recognizing its own replacement. What did they even talk about?
They talked about the looming shadow of socialism, the rise of democratic forces. Franz Joseph and later Victor Emmanuel in Italy, they both had this sort of wistfulness, a resignation to the doom of royalty.
They saw Roosevelt, this vigorous American Republican leader, as the future.
And they saw themselves as fading into history. It was this fascinating, almost melancholy exchange between the past and the rising century.
But the meeting with Kaiser Wilhelm II in Berlin, that was probably the most important geopolitical moment of the whole trip.
Chilling foreshadowing for sure. Roosevelt was greeted with this massive, sobering display of German naval might at Kiel.
And that display was deeply strategic, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Roosevelt saw the dreadnoughts, the battle cruisers, all cramming the inner fjord, and crucially, he noticed the Kaiser Wilhelm Canal was being enlarged.
He described it as a miniature of his own Panama project.
But ominously enlarged for military purposes. He saw firsthand the German appetite for global power through naval dominance.
It's so interesting how TR could switch from that kind of cold strategic analysis to just a pure display of personal dominance in his own encounters.
The contrast between him and Wilhelm is fascinating. Wilhelm, the fantasist obsessed with military parades, and Roosevelt, the practical man of action.
And Roosevelt treated the Kaiser with, shocking irreverence.
Oh, yeah. There's that great story about the meeting outside Buckingham Palace.
Right.
The Kaiser, is all eager to talk and says he has an hour, and Roosevelt just looks at his watch.
And says what?
I'll give you 20 minutes.
To the German emperor. Wow. A move so blunt, it should have been a diplomatic incident.
But it beguiled, rather than offended, the Kaiser. Roosevelt was rewarded with a private dinner and gave Wilhelm his inside take on British naval concerns.
And these two powerful, hyper-masculine figures, they found common ground in a cordial dislike of shams and of pretense.
Exactly. And that shared skepticism really underpinned Roosevelt's whole approach to the Nobel Peace Prize ceremonies he had to do in Christiania, Norway. He did them, as the sources note, without enthusiasm.
Why the lack of enthusiasm? I mean, he was a proponent of peace.
He was, but he had strong reservations about the methods. He had this deep-seated doubt about the whole Hague idea of talking away conflicts that had to happen.
So for him, peace wasn't something you achieved with treaties.
No. For Roosevelt, peace was a consequence of strength. He'd seen the uneasy peace in North Africa, the fractious peace in Austria-Hungary. It all just confirmed his belief that talk alone couldn't prevent wars driven by fundamental national or racial conflicts.
And he really put his foot down when Andrew Carnegie pressured him to give a speech pleading for arms control.
He flatly refused.
Yeah.
He and the Kaiser were completely aligned in their mutual disdain for the WASHI movement for international peace with which Carnegie's name has become so closely associated.
It was just hollow pretense to him.
You couldn't just wish away German naval ambition or the deep ethnic tensions in the Balkans. Conflict to him was often an unavoidable, even a necessary part of history.
And he demonstrated that conviction with incredible force during the famous Guildhall address in London.
He didn't just accept honors there. He threw a geopolitical hand grenade.
He provoked absolute fury by basically instructing His Majesty's government on its policy in the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan.
He told them they were being too weak, that they had to stand for humanity against barbarism, referencing the murder of General Gordon years earlier. He demanded Britain either fulfill its imperial duty or get out.
Which is just a staggering thing for a former head of state to do. It's no wonder the liberal press was infuriated.
The criticism was brutal. The National Review said, "No summary can do justice to the vulgarity and ignorance of the oration." The Manchester Guardian called it muddled, boyish thinking.
It wasn't just a political disagreement, was it?
No, it was a deep cultural shock in the old world, that this boisterous, moralistic American would lecture them on governance and military strength. This whole European trip showed us TR unconstrained, a celebrity using his platform to lecture kings and cabinets, no matter the diplomatic fallout.
So Roosevelt comes home, celebrated across the globe. He was hailed at Cambridge as, what was the Latin?
Strenuissime insignissime civium toto orbe terrae hodie agentem. The most strenuous and distinguished citizen dominating the world scene.
Right, but that immense global prestige immediately smacks right into the messy, strained reality of domestic politics with his successor, Taft.
The reunion was awkward from the start. Taft was, well, he was really suffering from a severe case of presidential insecurity.
He was inordinately susceptible to guidance from his brothers, who were more cautious.
Much more cautious and orthodox. And Taft himself lacked confidence. Roosevelt had to keep insisting that people address Taft as Mr. President, trying to maintain the decorum that Taft's own family was undermining.
But that deep-seated rivalry was already there, wasn't it? Fueled by their different personalities. Taft was slow, cautious, legalistic.
And Roosevelt was quick, vigorous, moralistic. It was bound to clash.
And you see that rivalry break out into the open later that year.
Yeah, when TR loses a political race in New York, Taft can't hide his satisfaction. He's privately chortling that they have defeated Theodore.
He was genuinely afraid of Roosevelt's return.
He was. He feared TR's reformist agenda, and he believed the GOP was already heading for major losses because of rising prices and gridlock in Congress.
And that reformist agenda really takes shape in August 1910 in his speech at Osawatomie, Kansas. This is where he defines his new nationalism.
And it was a truly radical moment, revolutionary for the time. He went further than he ever had before, insisting that property rights must henceforth be secondary to those of the common welfare.
Which was a direct assault on the conservative, laissez-faire wing of the Republican Party, Taft's base.
Totally. He revived his square deal slogan, arguing that the whole struggle for liberty has always been about taking unearned power or wealth away from one man or one class.
This wasn't just rhetoric. It was a blueprint for fundamentally restructuring American capitalism.
Empowering the government to regulate wealth and power in ways that were completely unprecedented. And he didn't shy away from what that meant constitutionally.
This is where he recommends the annulment of judicial decisions.
Right. If they favored property rights over human rights, this was guaranteed to enrage the legalistic mind of Taft.
Okay, hold on. You mentioned before that Taft regarded everything, even honor, as justiciable.
Right.
What does that actually mean in this context? Because it sounds very technical.
It is. It's a key legal idea. For Taft, basically it meant that even huge political issues could and should be decided by a court of law.
So judges get the final say.
Exactly. Using established legal principles. But Roosevelt was saying, no. If the courts, especially the conservative Supreme Court, are blocking progressive social laws, the will of the Democratic majority should be able to trump that judicial decision.
So he's putting the will of the people over the constitutional authority of the courts. That is volatile.
It was political dynamite. He was attacked for sheer madness, or promoting demagogy. Someone said it made the progressive firebrand Senator La Follette look like a reactionary.
Taft must have scoffed at it.
Privately, yeah. He said Roosevelt's program could never be gotten through without a revolution or revisions to the Constitution.
So as the 1912 Republican Convention in Chicago gets closer, the fight becomes less about philosophy and more about systems.
It really does. Taft had the convention locked down through the old, opaque caucus system party bosses' patronage. But Roosevelt's strength was in the new, more democratic primary system, reflecting the will of the voters.
And the convention was just pandemonium.
A true spectacle. Roosevelt supporters knew the fix was in, but they fought. The air was filled with this hiss of sandpaper being scraped together.
To mimic the sound of the steamroller.
The party machine working to flatten the revolt and guarantee tax renomination.
And the critical, heartbreaking moment for TR's allies was when Elihu Roosevelt's own mentor was elected permanent chairman.
That sealed it. The machine had won. And that decision led directly to the historic bolt. TR told his people flatly he would not accept Taft's renomination.
And his followers, who saw this as a holy war, immediately gathered that night at Orchestra Hall to organize the Progressive Party.
And in this frenzy of populist energy, the crowd symbolically tore the roof off the hall, ready to follow him down this strange, untraveled road.
And the long-term impact of that split is just massive, isn't it?
It's maybe the most significant insight of the decade. By splitting the Republican vote between Taft the conservative and Roosevelt the progressive, they basically hand the 1912 election to Woodrow Wilson,
Ushering in 8 years of Democratic rule.
and fundamentally changing the GOP's relationship with reform. The party of Lincoln and Roosevelt would spend decades trying to shake the perception that it was defined by Taft's cautious orthodoxy, not the radical energy of the bull moose.
So after that failed bull moose run, TR is faced with rebuilding his finances and, maybe more importantly, his reputation after all the nasty attacks from the campaign.
Which leads directly to the William Barnes Jr. libel trial. Barnes accused him of implying the whole GOP was corrupt.
And the trial becomes this huge public spectacle.
It does. It turns the political war into a courtroom drama. And TR is forced to address his private life, specifically the rumors about his drinking. He had to refute hints of alcoholism under oath.
He testified that he only drank an occasional glass of Madeira or white wine, and at big dinners, an occasional glass of champagne.
Right. And this was backed up by witnesses who, in this really colorful courtroom moment, assured the court that his thirst for alcohol was only slightly greater than Carrie Nation's.
Carrie Nation, the axe-wielding prohibitionist, that's fantastic.
It was a very successful defense of his character. It reinforced his image as a man of moral clarity.
And the result was a symbolic victory. He wins the case, but the verdict itself was practically nothing.
6 cents in damages and $5.75 in costs. But the real victory was the public exoneration, the confirmation that he was an honest man fighting a corrupt machine.
With his name cleared, he takes a moment to engage with this explosion of cultural modernity happening in New York.
He visits the famous Armory Show, the first big exhibition of modern art in America.
Yeah.
Picasso, Braque, Marcel Duchamp,
Yeah.
all the names we now know.
And his reaction really showed his deep discomfort with a cultural landscape that was moving for him too far too fast.
Yeah, he called the Cubists and Futurists the lunatic fringe.
He was especially baffled by Duchamp's nude descending a staircase. He described it as a shuddery flutter of cinematic movement.
I mean, this is a man who could wrestle a lion and map an unknown river, but a painting of a person walking down stairs that looked like shattered glass, that was just too much modernity for him.
He called the new art inhuman, saying it lacked sincerity. He even compared Duchamp's painting unfavorably to a Navajo rug.
Saying the rug was infinitely ahead of the picture in decorative value and sincerity. It reveals this fascinating split in his intellect.
He's an enthusiast for modern science and technology like airplanes.
But he's deeply wary of cultural modernism that seems to abandon classical forms. For him, it felt morally or aesthetically dishonest. It was his personal line in the sand against the cultural lunatic fringe.
But he didn't ponder art for long, did he? His response to being unconstrained was just to find the next, more dangerous adventure.
The Amazon expedition, the Roosevelt-Rondon scientific venture in 1913-1914.
The mission was profoundly ambitious and dangerous.
Extremely. It was conceived with a strictly scientific focus: geography, natural history. They aimed to link Brazil's two great waterways by descending the unmapped River of Doubt, Rio de Duvida, with Colonel Rondon.
He wanted to explore nearly 1,000 miles of the world's largest unknown river system.
This was supposed to be the African safari, but harder.
But pretty much everything went wrong logistically.
Almost everything. It was the total opposite of the managed African safari. In the Amazon, it was logistical disaster from the start. They had way too much heavy equipment, the dugout canoes were leaky and unstable.
And the progress was painfully slow.
Excruciatingly slow. Kermit had to land nearly 100 times one day just to take readings. They made only 9.3 kilometers in that entire day.
9 kilometers in a full day. The psychological strain of that, just battling the inertia of the jungle, must have been crushing.
Absolutely. And the physical toll was just devastating.
Yeah.
Fevers, dysentery, chronic pain, and what the sources call a veritable plague of deep abscesses.
Infected sores that made just sitting or walking agonizing.
And then the danger became life-threatening when they lost the canoe.
The one with a huge portion of their provisions.
Exactly. They lost that food, which forced immediate rationing. They were quickly heading towards starvation. The mood just shifted from a scientific venture to desperate survival.
Cherry, one of the members, wrote in his diary, "Our position is really a very serious one."
And Roosevelt himself got a severe leg injury that became infected. It plunged him into this near-fatal fever and delirium.
He essentially had to be carried out of the jungle, right?
Yeah.
Dramatically aged, suffering from chronic malaria and the effects of those abscesses.
But despite the harrowing near-death journey, they did it. They succeeded. They mapped a river that turned out to be longer than the Rhine. He proved the man, but at an immense physical cost. So Roosevelt gets back home in May 1914, battered but with his reputation as the indomitable explorer confirmed. And just 2 months later, Europe erupts into the First World War.
For TR, the shock was immediate. His focus shifted entirely from the jungle to the global stage.
He felt that Americans had lost their moral fiber under tact, and now Woodrow Wilson. He thought they were becoming prepared to just forget about Belgium and Lusitania.
To forget the moral implications of this brutal European conflict.
And his conviction was solidified by these horrifying first-hand reports he was getting from his daughter, Ethel.
She was working in Paris as a wartime nurse.
Yes, and she described seeing Belgian soldiers hideously mutilated by shrapnel and shell, and civilian refugees, including unattached children, on trains, some with their right hands cut off by the German advance.
That reality, that visceral, graphic brutality of modern war, it made American neutrality, which Wilson was championing, morally unacceptable to Roosevelt.
So he immediately launches this furious public crusade against Wilson's neutrality policy. He believed his fierce criticism was essential. It was what the country needed.
His message was simple, moral, and direct. To invite disaster is to be opulent, offensive, and unarmed.
He felt America was arrogantly rich, morally demanding, but just militarily weak. A dangerous combination.
He believed that people living at ease who ignored the grand and noble aspects of the conflict needed to be woken up.
And his rhetorical weapons were aimed squarely at Wilson's cautious academic political style. He condemned Wilson's policy in Mexico, for instance,
saying it was a course wavering between peace and war, exquisitely designed to combine the disadvantages of both.
Indecision was the worst possible posture for him. But the height of his verbal attack, the most stinging insult, was when he attacked Wilson's public speeches.
Right, he called them worthy of a Byzantine logothete.
Which is such a telling insult because it's so obscure. A Byzantine logothete was a petty, word-spinning bureaucrat from ancient Constantinople.
Basically, an accountant obsessed with meaningless details and flowery language instead of action.
Exactly. It was TR, the verbal warrior, using his intellectualism to deliver the most scathing form of contempt imaginable.
He even called Wilson's famous 1916 re-election slogan, "He kept us out of war," the phrase of a coward.
He argued that war had been creeping closer and closer until it stares at us from just beyond our 3-mile limit. And America had no policy, plan, purpose, or preparation.
Which led to his intense advocacy for military preparedness.
He even visited the Plattsburgh civilian training camps, which was this incredible example of his strenuous life doctrine applied to the whole nation.
It was a fascinating experiment.
It was. Roosevelt was thrilled to see bankers and lawyers running with 40-pound bags, training under this intense discipline. He argued that no nation could amount to anything if it was full of pacifists and poltroons. Moral righteousness was useless without the physical capacity to back it up.
So when the U.S. finally declares war in April 1917, TR immediately sees his chance to lead by example.
He asks for permission to raise an all-volunteer division for immediate service in Europe. He had thousands of applications ready to go.
But the answer was a swift and painful no.
A denial orchestrated by Secretary of War Newton D. Baker, who cited purely military reasons. The General Staff argued that command had to go to professional officers who'd made a professional study of the recent changes in the art of war.
And Wilson delivered the final political blow.
He did. While acknowledging the political compliment of sending an ex-president, Wilson insisted modern war demanded scientific definiteness and precision.
It was the ultimate rejection of the strenuous ideal.
Roosevelt was seen as an old military showman whose enthusiasm would only get in the way of the organized business of modern industrial war. They wanted engineers, not cowboys. And that denial, it must have been absolutely crushing for him.
The denial of his request to serve must have been soul-crushing, but TR found a kind of justification, a kind of service, through the immense pride he took in his 4 sons.
Ted, Kermit, Archie, and Quentin, all serving on the front lines in Europe.
This was the ultimate vindication of his lifelong philosophy. Ted Jr. was made commander of the 1st Battalion, 26th Infantry, AEF, 1st Division.
The only war-ready American unit in France at the time. AEF, for the listener, is the American Expeditionary Force.
TR felt this incredible sense of justification. He wrote that his wife, Edith, and all his children, by their service, had justified my words.
He saw their action as proof of his moral and political foresight.
And Quentin, the youngest, really embodied this figure. He became a pilot in the 95th Aero Squadron.
He was a mechanically minded kid, a wise philosopher, who had loved flying since 1909. We know he secretly suffered from pneumonia after high-altitude training.
But he was driven by this intense fear of slacking.
Right, especially after his brother Archie had accused him of staying behind the lines. That fear of not doing enough, that was the ultimate Rooseveltian burden. He desperately wanted to be at the front.
And he got there.
He did. But then came the family's greatest personal tragedy. On July 18, 1918, TR received a cable that Quentin was missing.
And then it was confirmed he was killed in action, shot down over German lines.
The private grief must have been just devastating. Edith was unassuageable. She became the central card upon which the rest of the Roosevelt pack leaned.
And yet, 30 minutes later, TR emerges to deliver one of the most famously stoic public statements in political history.
Just one line, he said, "Quentin's mother and I are very glad that he got to the front and had a chance to render some service to his country and to show the stuff there was in him before his fate befell him."
An act of just profound self-control, shielding his agony with this armor of patriotic conviction.
Privately, though, the loss was transformative. It was deeply painful. TR admitted that death in battle was no more glamorous than death in an abattoir.
He admonished the father in him, the one who had always romanticized war.
The brutal reality had shattered his heroic vision. He knew he couldn't even try to write about Quentin without breaking down.
And in a final, profound act of respect, the family declined the Army's offer to bring Quentin's body home.
They preferred that Quentin shall continue to lie on the spot where he fell in battle and where the foemen buried him. His crash site actually became a shrine for passing Allied troops.
TR spent his final months dramatically weakened by illness, acute pain in his leg and feet, likely rheumatism. But his rage was all political.
He was focused entirely on Wilson's handling of the post-war peace process, negotiations that would lead to the League of Nations.
He was convinced Wilson would double-cross the Allies for a negotiated peace that would glorify himself. He viewed Wilson's academic idealism with just utter contempt.
He believed America had to dictate terms through strength, not through vague international agreements.
On Election Day in November 1918, despite being so frail, he hobbled to the polling place, a blacksmith shop, to cast his ballot.
And in a poignant historical detail, for all his support of universal suffrage, his wife Edith was still unable to vote.
He took great satisfaction the next morning when the Republicans won both houses of Congress.
He saw himself as probably the chief factor in stopping Wilson from dominating the international scene, a final political triumph against his nemesis.
And his final statement really encapsulates his whole existence, doesn't it?
It does. Leaving the hospital on Christmas morning 1918, bracing himself against vertigo, refusing to look ill, he made a final promise to his doctor.
He said, "I promised myself that I would work up to the hilt until I was 60, and I have done it."
He died a few days later, aged 60.
His funeral in Oyster Bay was attended by so many, including a visibly distraught William Howard Taft.
And in a final poignant visual that really connects his complex legacy of war, science, mourning, the Air Corps maintained a vigil over Sagamore Hill after his death.
The very service that claimed his son.
And the wind for their propellers shook the bare trees, a true end to the strenuous life.
So if we look back at that hyperactive, uncontained decade, 1909 to 1919, what does all this relentless activity tell us about Theodore Roosevelt and his legacy?
I think it confirms his almost superhuman capacity for continuous, intense action. He was constantly running. He transformed from this unprecedented scientific collector and global celebrity
To a political apostate who literally shattered his own party over the principle of economic justice.
and finally to the nation's most vocal advocate for moral and military strength against global threats. He just couldn't exist without a mountain to climb or a battle to fight.
And his intellectual curiosity was so boundless, even if it was often contradictory. He dove deep into nature. He understood political machines intimately.
He loved the potential of new technology like airplanes, but he just recoiled from what he saw as the inhuman response of modern art, like Cubism.
He was defined by this constant, strenuous, sometimes messy quest for truth-seeking in a spirit of reverence.
Right. He embraced the physical science of the modern age, but he fought tooth and nail against what he saw as its cultural and moral emptiness.
What's really fascinating here is how acutely aware he was of the geopolitical acceleration of his time, even when he was trekking through the Amazon.
Yeah, he wrote that the whole world movement is of constantly accelerating velocity, where the tension and strain are so great that there is cause to dread the ruin that follows.
He felt so intensely the coming global catastrophe that led directly to the war that claimed his son.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener. Roosevelt saw this rapid, violent political landscape shift, from the old guard conservatives to this total break into progressivism, and finally to the terrifying scale of global war.
Given how quickly the political and technological landscape can shift, and how unprepared America felt for the conflicts he warned about, how should we, as a society, balance that intense, immediate action TR's style of fervor, moral certainty, and risk-taking?
With the measured, long-term strategic synthesis and political consensus that you need to navigate a world moving at constantly accelerating velocity.
What price do we, as a society, pay for having either too much fervent, immediate action risking a bull moose split, or an unnecessary jumble fever?
Or too little measured strategic preparation when you're facing existential conflicts that you'd rather deny until they're staring at you from just beyond your 3-mile limit.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.